Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for the organizers, your excellent distinguished guests. I'm very delighted to be here with you today on this excellent conference. What I've seen so far is really well organized, and the whole logistics services and supply chain sector is so close to my heart. I want to talk to you today about your role, the role of the supply chain and the logistics service providers in the new world of due diligence reporting. And you have a huge opportunity now to not just, and that's already a big deal, not just to be the hub in the region, a hub for logistics, but also with that role, you have a distinguished opportunity to play in the whole area of more sustainability, in the whole area of a world that meets the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, in your own plan, but also help the rest of the world to achieve this in every day's progress. Now, what I want to talk to you in this half an hour is, after quickly introducing you to the Euro Retail Institute, our think tank, is basically what is the new driver of this new legislation. We've heard about voluntary reporting requirements. We hear that you're also here in the kingdom working on this. Many companies do this. But there is in the world an increased driver for also the public sector to have public reporting requirements. And what does that mean to the industry? And with then a few examples of a collaborative thinking approach, which I'm myself directly involved, then I would like to define a better and a suggestion to your role, the role of the logistics industries and service providers. Now, the EHI is a German-based, 60-year-old think tank. We do provide consulting, research, but also education. Now, retail in its essence is logistics. It's the last mile. But they have to organize also the entire supply chain to make sure to meet consumer requirements. The retail industry in that ever-changing landscape, is also more and more into the digital area. You have also the online shops. You have the hybrid formulas. So logistics becomes time critical, in particular for these industries. Now, just don't go through all of this, but one of the key areas I will refer to is in that years where these retailers got together with suppliers, they defined standards for logistics because they are the ultimate buyer just before the consumer. They set up standards you all work with. These are these GS1 global standards for logistics, and I will refer to that a bit later. And then there are standards on food safety, on hygiene, on good practices, and even efficiency. So the Retail Institute was founded from two different streams. One is more like the shop design, but the other one is really the supply logistics. 25 years ago, my first job was how to harmonize pallets and containers, and to make them a reusable system, so you don't have to throw away any way of these containers. That was already very revolutionary, and this is now coming more and more, how to clean them in the system, etc. So what is the new trend? The new trend started with all the United Nations developments, and in 2010 there were the first initiatives and laws coming into force, and United Nations requirements, or also United Nations recommendations for responsible businesses starting in 2011. Building up national legislation. And you see in 2021, 2022, and we're having even more coming now, I'll show you. This is from a research related to the food sector, where I'm primarily coming from. There is a tremendous increase in new legislation. So that means being in an area here in the Middle East, you have your legislation, but also having the ambition, and which I really think you will achieve, having a global hub here for logistics, that requires that with due diligence legislation in your different countries, those you collaborate with will have in supply chains an impact of all of the companies also operating in this region. Just to give you one example, how it's going beyond 2022 is now the latest adoption of a regulation for protecting the forests, for rainforests. So it's a deforestation-free product legislation. It was adopted and published then in June, just this year. And it will enter into force already, or has been entered into force. Meaning, like European legislation always has a certain lag and time lag, everyone can adapt to it. This means by the end of next year, there will be the first application and first companies, smaller ones not yet, have to have a full transparency and demonstrate that all their products in a certain range of products, these are main commodities, it's like beef, it is soybeans, a few more, like 7 commodities, they will have no impact on destroying more rainforests. So that is, and the government will, and the European Union will control these companies. And this is now close to where my project is working on, and that's in the area of supply chain due diligence in Germany. Germany took, like some of the other countries, like in the UK, took on a legislative implementation support. An implementation support for what the government, the civil society, wanted from the big importing companies, including retailers, but also organizations like DHL, who is here in the logistics, or the automotive industry, the energy sector. They wanted from these companies to make sure that in their supply chain, not only within their own, but also in their own companies, but also their direct suppliers and even indirect suppliers to the source, to make sure that they will have, they reduce any violations. Violations with respect to human rights, violations with respect to environmental risks. So companies that are larger than 3,000, has more than 3,000 employees in Germany, and that are quite a few already. And I'm now more looking for the retail side, the consumer retail. They already have to do this right now. It's in effect in 2023. Smaller companies will come. But this is only Germany maybe. But German government has pushed this forward to the European Union. So the European Union is in the process to also align this and even strengthen it. The current draft, the draft of which has been agreed of the new legislation, the Supply Chain DDD, the Supply Chain Due Diligence Directive, is a directive which the member states of the European Union have to implement if it all comes through as planned by 2025. That means that companies in Europe that have, and that's the current language we have more than 250 employees within the European Union, or more than 40 million turnover, which is basically nothing in terms of size. They will have to do a reporting that they do all the reasonable efforts when they hear about any violation in the supply chain, that they follow through with their suppliers. And this will also include, which is not part of the German law yet, is also include the Paris Agreement on CO2 reporting and emissions. So if you have evidence that you have that the companies in that supply chain are not working on reducing the emissions, are basically violating those plans, then you have to account some consequences if you are not willing to work with the suppliers. Well, this is a driver. And how it really plays out, I think there's a lot of questions still in the industry, but we have the first cases. I will talk and focus a lot on an environmental case here today, which I'm actually myself involved, and I'm building that type of mechanism involving people. But I wanted to share with you directly in your space, which isn't part of the presentation, a very recent incident within Germany. There has been a strike. There has been a strike of truck drivers. They were more than 100, sometimes 150 truck drivers from a Polish company on a German highway parking lot. Some of them went into even a hunger strike because of violations of that Polish company against the law in terms of some critical things. One of that was they weren't even paying the salaries for these drivers and holding them back. So there was really a strike of these farmers, which was a wild strike just by social media. Now, what would that mean? I mean, there was even different negotiations, etc. But in the end, the new legislation got into it. These drivers were showing papers of major German companies whose products they were transporting and have to deliver. Now that makes, in the new law, brought the German government, the Minister of Labor, and their authorities to the plan and saying, hey guys, you should make sure that this violation, not paying any salaries for any of your suppliers and logistics, I don't want to tolerate. You have to resolve it. The first reaction was, oh, no, we have no business with this truck company at all. That was the result. Well, now, interesting enough, of course, none of these big brands, and these were including BMW, including Volkswagen, including Mercedes, including big retailers. Of course, they did not have a contract with this logistics. The typical way of transport and logistics in Europe is you have your subcontractor, your big contractor, and whatever the load is, and you know it, you sort of subcontract. So there was like, even without the code of conducts they had, it would go like 2, 3, 4 different further down the chain with different brokers. So in the end, yes, the products on those trucks were destined to go to these big companies. Now, this is an impact where transparency, that's my claim, that transparency now is so important for all of your clients. Even though I'm now talking about a food sector, and food security is a key piece, I'm talking about that. Of course, you in logistics will deal with all the different sectors. Now, what this means, currently the legislation is, it means that from a certification system, from compliance of systems, now we go into a reporting, into a due diligence. The due diligence means data reporting, and we've heard that in different presentations, so I don't have to repeat all this. It does mean more data, more digitalization, and also more transparency, which I said. Now, looking into the food sector, you have to make sure that you really have interoperability. You have to know who is playing there. And looking into the food sector, the farming sector is one of the most difficult to address, but it's so important. And you're building here, I know, I yesterday spoke with a big Moroccan producer of tomatoes, and he said, yes, he has invitations to come to Saudi Arabia, to come to the kingdom and invest. I know the ambition to build more products and have more farming. But the farming sector is key in the starting of it. And there are, in this supply chain, so many initiatives, different ones from governments, NGOs, from universities. I just give a few of them that try to help in the interoperability. But it's still very difficult for companies to actually follow. So that was in 2014. When we had our global conference of a previous employer of myself, of Global GAP, in Abu Dhabi, where under patronage of Sheikh Mansour, his His Excellency, we have developed a declaration for global food security. And that was built on certain pillars. It was built on interoperability, on same practices, an alliance, private and public sector. And also already a mechanism for reporting. So that was already 2014, and it is taking longer than you think. But in the end, companies, big brands, signed up for this. You had governments signing up, the United Nations, WTO, ITC, International Trade Center. You had, of course, we were the Food Safety Authority in Abu Dhabi because it was about food safety. And many of their farms, they now entered into that system of transparency. And as you see here, the GS1 is part of it as well. Now, this was one of the components was to work on harmonizing private, publicly, identification. I mean, that's key. Logistics without unit identification, I don't want to tell you anything more, you know it. And GS1 is part of that system. But what was missing is to look at some of the levels, like in food, it's the farming sector that wasn't included in this transparency. But when you talk about deforestation, when you talk about food safety, when you talk about environment and metrics, water, biodiversity, then yes, the agricultural sector needs to be included in this supply chain. Now, so looking at the farm, then we have been starting to build, and we're quite successful now, build also including the agriculture into the system. I don't want to explain this. I just wanted to give you the impression that with different organizations working together, making assurance and guarantee, we will be able to set up a global registry, a registry for farms. So my first point here is, yes, you're building up farms here, you're training globally, you buy and import still a lot of food. You have a look and make sure that your traceability goes to a harmonized level for the reporting down to the farm or up from the farm and their input factors. And again, on that reporting, it means for supply chains, it's much more collaborative thinking. We have a lot of digitalization, and we have interoperability. But when I hear from different educational purposes, and there will be a session after this again also on capacity building training, then the humans, the people working on the supply chains are increasingly important to make more efficiencies, but also to be part of a reporting system. So effective mechanisms is part of a function which also not just have the technology, but also have the humans involved in those supply chains. Now this is the practical example. We're here in Spain. We're in the south of Spain, which is since in the 60s, 1962 or so, it was a natural park, a national park, Doñana. In this national park, there is a big reservoir for birds. It's a wetland. It has a laguna. It's a very fast-changing ecosystem. During the time of the Romans, there was even a big laguna. Now it's being almost like swatted. They had some spots of changes. And what you see to the right is that there is, since the 90s, there have been a big production growth of intensive agriculture. In particular, berries. It was the new red gold. Everyone was going in there. We had citrus. We had even avocados now. So they are starting and taking more and more water, sometimes even illegal wells. Governments wanted to freeze it, but it was still an issue of civil society. And here, some of these are now civil society organizations that have a lot of influence in the German politics, also with retail reputation. They started to go to the media. They were going to boycott and say, please do not buy these strawberries from these places. That's how the new due diligence reporting comes into place, because now with these reports, The retailers that are buying there have what the law says, substantiated evidence. There is evidence that there is an environmental violation in the supply chain. Now these retailers have to go and investigate and have to do everything and try to improve this. If they don't, the German government in the law has the right for those retailers to actually give them a fine of 3%, maximum fine of 3% of their annual sales. 3%. This is going up to top management. This requires real action. So how to actually prove this and how to do this? So these are the retailers, these are the leading retailers in Germany, 80+% of the market share in the food sector in particular, and more than 500 billion turnover altogether. They have said, let's work together. We go to the antitrust authority, try to get an exception, and let's work together and have a meeting with the producers, with those non-government organizations that are driving this. So they looked into Spain. Spain is the issue to start with. But we don't want to stop in Spain. Once Spain works, then we will go to other destinations. It's going to be a starting point for a new global alliance. And this alliance we have now named Appellando. So I'm part of that initiation, but I want to use this as an example to look. And we have done a list of criteria. Again, a declaration like 2014 on global food security. Now, this new declaration is also very generic, but it does refer to the United Nations resolutions, to United Nations recommendations of responsible business practice. But also the national law must be complied with. But to involve more stakeholders, more transparency, and have this private-public partnership, businesses and governments, but also, and that is, I think, a bit of the new part, I think the law requires that you also involve more civil society organizations. Yes, there's a big variety of those, and it's not always easy. And some of them want to keep them arm's length away from you. But I think there are a lot of very collaborative groups that have a lot of science base that can help and make this work. And some other areas we want to bring in, report and progress, and it's a lot of data protection, but key when you operate in Europe. Now, these are first organizations next to the retailers we have coming up every day new ones. I just want to demonstrate here, there is an NGO, there is a trade union involved, there are technology providers. And just with this sketch here, this pilot we are doing, and that is why I'm here so happy to be invited to speak to you. This pilot now actually so far excludes the logistics part because they haven't come forward yet. Even though you're just doing it all, you work on food, you work on all the other sectors. So if there's any harmonization in reporting, if there's any opportunity that you can help all your customers, then I'm hoping the awareness rises that the role of the supply chain and the logistics services sector is really pivotal, is key here. So when you look at the new trend from what you've been doing so far, is often next to the product, you've managed certificates, ISO certificates, environmental certificates, some social certificates. That was next to any product. You wanted to make sure you have your excellency, the performance, the cold chain, everything has been checked. But now what is getting more and more is you become more the aggregator of data for your customers, for the supply chain. You already do a lot for just-in-time delivery, for your whole management, but there's the additional data which you heard before from Denise and yesterday from Douglas from EPICS to see all the rules and the reporting, that data is being recorded, will need to be aligned because of all the different supply chains. So, in order to do that, you have the choice. Everyone has the choice. You are a taker of those standards that are out there, and you have to manage complexity. Every different supply chain, every different country, every different customer already today has different reporting requirements. But that would really be crazy. It would be crazy if you want to build, and you will build, a global hub. There will be a clear distinction in the future, and that's my personal view from being in that process for so many years, that the cost part of handling also information will also be deciding on the way with which of the logistics parts I'm working. Are they able to handle it? Are they able to respond to my requirements? So the investment that goes into secure data handling of multiple standards, or ideally to really be more proactive, to work on supporting mechanisms and supply chain activities that are harmonizing this. So being in between, sandwiched, the producers, the production, and the final consumer, then the consumer goods sales side, the logistics. We heard yesterday from the Honorable Minister, yes, you are a facilitator of all the industries. That is also true for data in the supply chain reporting. And in order to do that, as employer, and that was also my second part, as employer of your people, your own people, that has an impact as well in terms of quality. We do a lot of training for better efficiency, but we've learned that the ownership of being part of a good company in the leadership, but not down to all functions. The more people understand why they're doing things, the more they have an influence, the better the quality is. And you know that it's not just technology, it's just to see when there is fast moving, what works, which container needs to go where, and have the solution drivers for your responsiveness in the industry. As one of the examples I would like to share with you briefly is, and that when I handed in my presentation, it was still called Sustain IT. Now I think they have a new, they just launched a new name for it. The organization is basically looking at transformative measurement. They are harmonized. They are companies. They are the big companies that handle those bulk food products and belong like Cargill, like Olam, the ones that work on coffee and cocoa, on soy, on grains, on those core bulk commodities that are palm oil, that are in all the different products in the food sector. And they said, we've got to harmonize our reporting. And they're working closely with many of the logistics. So they have built now an own infrastructure and harmonization. And so I hope that also, Douglas has his parallel workshop now, but there are more alignments to actually think and align the way of reporting. Where's the next slide? Here. Whoops. Okay. Now, put it all as a summary. I think I did one too fast. No, that was already the one. Okay. So, what I'm saying here is, in the summary, the trend that there is more and more national and regional laws for sustainable due diligence reporting, for data reporting, not just certification, would require to involve more the people in the way of acting as one of the source of information, but also to look and see that having the people involved in your supply chain, with your customers, with your suppliers, as well as with the surroundings, the communities, the civil societies, and it's important to get active involved, to be in the forefront of this. So we started something in Abu Dhabi 2014, and I'm seeing already now the drive here in the investments into the sustainable future of logistics from this conference, and I hope we will work together and see more also take a leading role in harmonizing this across industries with a response into these new trends and get ahead of the curve for sustainable development. You have all the chance to do so. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dr. Kristian, thank you for your presentation. الآن إلى حلقة نقاش عن التحديات المستقبلية.